Good day, Prime Minister Trudeau. Complications from my stroke continue to deteriorate my health. While I sleep in bursts 3 to 4 times a day, I am spending longer and longer periods after each sleep, unable to see, unable to use some, most, or all of my left side. The headaches are growing worse with each day, and I can no longer afford how long it takes to both make a video, locate, and include evidence that I am telling the truth. I have left as much as I could in my GitHub repository when I still had the ability to write, and I will try to leave my computer and files with lawyers when I lose my vision completely. My last video explained only a single day, April 24th, 2017, and how I came to be held in Beach Meadows for 2 years after international human trafficking by the daily threats of murdering my uncle with Huntington's, and the 4 to 5 times daily beatings of 2 of my uncles, including the one with Huntington's. Only my presence could stop these beatings. This is why Roseanne Williams spread the beatings out over the day. It forced me to be in Beach Meadows 24 hours a day, and it terrorized the entire family because they never knew when she would show up or when these beatings would start. From April to August of 2017, I was extremely ill and getting sicker. Over my 2 years of captivity, Roseanne Williams used what she knew of my medical issues to make 5 attempts on my life, screaming that she wouldn't stop killing me, or doing worse, because there are worse things than being killed, that she wouldn't stop any of it until I did what I was told. The first prolonged attempt to end my life as leverage to force me to do things began on day 1. Roseanne, in retaliation for me embarrassing her by refusing to look after her husband, declared that I was not allowed to file my income taxes. I was not allowed to file for health care. I was not allowed to go to a doctor or hospital. I was not allowed to take any of the medications that I brought from overseas with me. And Roseanne Williams threatened me every night with the murder of my uncle if I did any of those things. This was done as punishment for embarrassing her in public on one day. The second prolonged attempt was my detransitioning over this 2-year period. While a normal transgendered individual is not biologically fatally injured when their transitioning meds are withheld, I am not a normal transgendered individual. During the Eden Knight situation earlier this year, many individuals that have been forcibly detransitioned the way she was described the experience as torturous. My medications, while some are the same types that a transgendered person would take, I take some that are not. And all of my meds and supplements are much more powerful than any transgendered individual would take because they aren't altering my gender. They are slowing or correcting 3 terminal metabolic conditions. Additionally, in my case, withholding my medications causes permanent physical and sexual mutilations, which classifies what Roseanne Williams did to me as both a murder attempt, because my death is inevitable when my medications are withheld, as well as an aggravated sexual assault, because my genitals and my sexuality were mutilated. Further, Prime Minister Trudeau, it cost me in excess of $400,000 over 25 years of treatments and doctors and medical appointments to partially correct the damage done to me when I was 7 years old in a single beating. And while I was told that that much money and that much time would slow my death, it certainly has not. I am on exactly the same schedule the doctors gave me in 1992. Roseanne Williams undid $400,000 in medical treatments. She undid 25 years of medical treatments in less than a year. As impossible as that may sound, Prime Minister Trudeau, the $10,000 in medication that I arrived in Nova Scotia with is only part of the medication that I require for a year. My medical expenses and doctor visits, assuming that I don't need any form of surgery that year, are between $10,000 and $15,000 a year. Over 25 years, it adds up very quickly. From April to July of 2017, Roseanne Williams did not hit me. I was getting sicker, and she wouldn't lay a finger on me, out of fear that she would injure me so severely that she would have to tell Dennis or Wilhelmina what was wrong, what she and I were hiding from them. And as each day passed and I was required to do more and more of Roseanne's housework and chores and errands under the threat that Larry would be killed if I didn't, I continued to get sicker. Wilhelmina's housework and errands got added to that list of responsibilities. It was Roseanne's way of torturing her own mother. She would force my Uncle Larry and I into Wilhelmina's house against Wilhelmina's wishes because Roseanne knew how much pain and distress that would cause her mother. If the RCMP had ever been bothered to question neighbors, they would be able to explain that in 2017, when Wilhelmina had the strength, she would chase Roseanne Williams from her house to her car. Wilhelmina would be screaming the entire time that it was elder abuse to force Larry and Jeffrey into her house this way. From April to July of 2017, Karen did the most damage to Roseanne, and she did it without lifting a finger. Karen did it without leaving her home. All Karen needed was a phone. Karen spent her days spreading the rumors in the surrounding communities that Roseanne had had the same mental breakdown that her mother had had, that Roseanne had run away. Karen was spreading the rumors that I, Jeffrey, was looking after Larry because the family was worried that Roseanne Williams would hurt him because of how violent she had become. It was that exact rumor that Roseanne spread about Karen in the 1980s, when Roseanne Williams took my younger brother and younger sister. It was Roseanne telling the community that Karen had had the mental breakdown and that the children were taken out of the fear that Karen would hurt them. This single rumor, and daily variations of it, cut Roseanne Williams to the quick, exponentially, and from all directions. Everywhere Roseanne went in public, people pointed and stared and whispered. Every time people drove by, they saw Roseanne was not at home. Every time people saw me in town with Larry, because it was my responsibility to take him to town twice a day, for coffee and chips and chocolate bars. These people would rush over to the truck to ask how Roseanne was doing, how Larry was doing, and to check to make sure that it wasn't in fact Larry driving himself. These people that rushed to the truck, they would apologize every day for reporting Roseanne to the RCMP for years, for accusing her of neglecting Larry for years, and for reporting Larry's driving over the last 3 or 4 years. When people in the community came up to Larry and I every day and whispered and apologized about the complaints that the community had filed about Roseanne causing her mental breakdowns, when they apologized for complaints that the community had filed with the RCMP in 2012 and 2014, that was all Karen's rumors feeding back on themselves. By mid-May, I was being forced into Karen's house twice a week. That's Roseanne Williams threatening to murder her own husband if I don't go to the homes of all 3 of my childhood rapists and do their housework and carry out their errands. Karen didn't really want housework done. She wanted her pound of flesh. That was her favorite expression. She wanted me in her kitchen so she could stand there like her mother and like her sister and scream that she was responsible for all of the rumors and all of the beatings and all of the torture that Roseanne and Wilhelmina were going through. It was Karen bragging twice a week that everything that was happening was her, that she was doing it all to cause pain and distress in her sister and her mother to simply get even with a lifetime of pain and distress. It was Karen screaming twice a week that she wouldn't stop until she got every pound of flesh Roseanne owed her. That was Karen's favorite expression. Karen screaming she wouldn't stop until she got every penny Roseanne owed her. Another of her favorite expressions. It was Karen screaming she wouldn't stop until I reported Roseanne Williams to the RCMP for my abduction. In 2017, it was Karen spreading the rumors that school officials had removed Roseanne from an administrative position after a mental breakdown in connection to the Mill Village school closure. It was Karen spreading the rumors that Roseanne being forced back to a much lower salary as a grade 2 classroom teacher instead of finishing her pension as a vice principal or principal that cost her so much money in her retirement. And all of this fed back on Roseanne. Whether she was seeing people pointing and staring and whispering, or whether Karen had told Wilhelmina that's what was happening, or whether it was just Wilhelmina calling to scream at Roseanne over the phone. Roseanne withdrew into greater and greater isolation. The more that she tried to get out in the community and prove that she was caring for her husband, the more people pointed and stared and whispered, and the more Roseanne withdrew to the cottage in La Belle. This also fed back on itself. The isolation made Roseanne angrier and more violent, which made her in turn feel like she deserved more time off and more things done for her. So there were more beatings and more threats to make me do more things. It all fed back on itself. The worse the rumors got, the more that I was required to do, the higher profile I took in the community, the worse the rumors got. And in turn, Roseanne would beat Dennis and Larry even worse, because she still wouldn't lift a finger against me. Karen's second rumor to cause pain and distress in Roseanne and Wilhelmina only occurred in Wilhelmina's kitchen or at family suppers at a local restaurant where only family members would hear. Karen would gossip endlessly with any family member so long as Roseanne could hear that Larry was faking his Huntingtons to make Roseanne think she was crazy, that Larry didn't act like he had Huntingtons when Jeffrey was around and Roseanne wasn't. All of this torture, all of this pain, all of this distress as Karen and Roseanne and Wilhelmina tore each other apart like rabid dogs. All of this meant Roseanne getting angrier and committing more and more physical and sexual violence against me, beating her husband, beating her brother, screaming at me it wouldn't stop until I made the rumors stop, when it was Karen and Wilhelmina spreading the rumors. All of Karen's damage to Roseanne took a heavier toll on Wilhelmina in those first few months. Roseanne was at least on some sort of vacation from her husband and her mother. All Karen wanted was pain for Roseanne and Wilhelmina, and she got that in spades. Wilhelmina was the only one not getting anything she wanted. There was no one looking after her, no one doing her housework. As the main thing that Wilhelmina wanted was for Roseanne to come home and look after her mother. Roseanne had promised to do that in exchange for the cottage in La Belle. From April to July of 2017, Wilhelmina grew increasingly desperate and violent because she wasn't getting what she wanted, and from her point of view, Karen and Roseanne were. Wilhelmina would provoke and torture Roseanne over the increasing rumors that Karen was spreading, screaming at Roseanne that she was a failure and an embarrassment. Wilhelmina was constantly screaming at Roseanne that she would take the cottage away and put it in the will like the house. The cottage would be sold so no one could have it, especially Roseanne. Wilhelmina did this to provoke Roseanne to even greater acts of violence against Larry and Dennis and I. Wilhelmina did this so that she could scream at Dennis that nothing would stop until he made Roseanne come home and look after her mother. Again, Prime Minister Trudeau, this is indescribable violence being committed by 3 psychopaths to get housework done. 3 men, one with Huntington's and one dying from multiple terminal medical issues, are all being beaten because Roseanne Williams doesn't want to do her own housework. From April to July of 2017, Wilhelmina lost this stretch of the war with her daughters. And the proverbial last straw was the end of June or 1st of July of 2017. As a child, at 7, 8, 9 years old, 10 years old, repairing fishing equipment for my Uncle Dennis in the driveway had ended my rape by men in the community by the time I was 12. Wilhelmina's ability to threaten her husband, my grandfather, with that same rape of his other grandchildren ended because I was fixing fishing equipment in the driveway. In the 1980s, Roseanne hijacked that threat to abduct my sister for almost a decade, through the late 80s and early 90s. In 2015, Wilhelmina could remember all that. For the 4 months that I looked after Erland Conrad, my grandfather, in 2015, Wilhelmina Conrad screamed at me every day that she wished that the men that had raped me as a child had taken me away and never brought me back. But 2 years later, in 2017, her dementia was getting the best of her, and she couldn't remember the specific details, just as she couldn't remember and fiercely denied that my childhood home had ever been renovated. She argued to the end of her days that no one had ever renovated that house. She also couldn't remember why me being in the front yard was so upsetting, or why seeing me fixing fishing equipment was so upsetting. But it was. It was more distressing for Wilhelmina than the rumors about Roseanne, and Wilhelmina simply couldn't admit she didn't know why this put her into such a state. And because she couldn't admit it, because she didn't know why, it only made Wilhelmina more vicious. At the end of June or 1st of July, I was only setting lobster equipment in the front yard for Dennis to repair. I wasn't going to repair it myself. I didn't have the strength or the skills anymore. But just the simple act of Wilhelmina seeing me in the front yard setting up lobster equipment sent her into such a frenzy, she tried to kill herself. She spent an entire afternoon trying to haul hundreds or thousands of pounds of ropes and lobster traps over on top of herself, screaming at me the entire time. She was doing it so she could be hospitalized, because Roseanne would have to come home and look after her if she was hospitalized. She was screaming the entire time that if she was killed by this equipment falling on her, then at least she would see her husband again, and she would make damn sure Dennis knew that it was all my fault. My feelings about Wilhelmina aside, I was not going to be responsible for the death of Dennis's mother, a 90-year-old woman with dementia. He was the man that raised me, and he was taking multiple beatings a day because I was too sick to take a beating from Roseanne. When I refused to return to Wilhelmina's, when I refused to cause that woman that much distress, Roseanne threw an epic tantrum, demanding that I go when and wherever she wanted, and do whatever I was told to do, or Larry would be killed. Wilhelmina saw the first chink in Roseanne's armor, and got her claws into Roseanne with this tiny piece of information, and it was downhill for Roseanne for the rest of my captivity. I never returned to Wilhelmina's to do yard work or housework. I would go once a day to help Larry with his supper, or when someone called screaming that Roseanne was killing Dennis. Roseanne continued to find times and ways to beat Dennis and Larry when I wasn't there, or I wasn't at the table, or I wasn't in the kitchen. But it had become routine that I take a beating at every meal that Roseanne attended. She beat me with open fists, she beat me with closed fists, she beat me while holding silverware. She struck me on my back and shoulders when she was standing behind me, but as she never sat at the table, she would only sit in a much lower rocking chair directly behind me, so that she could hit and jab and stab me in my lower back and buttocks with silverware. The first and most life-threatening result of me being beaten at the beginning of July was damage to my kidneys, liver, and intestines. I began to bleed into my urine and feces for the rest of the summer, and would frequently be beaten until blood would run down the back of my leg, although the only person that could see it was Roseanne and Wilhelmina. Roseanne did not actually penetrate my rectum with silverware until March of 2018. Karen's tortures got worse over July. Wilhelmina had her claws in Roseanne, and the tide shifted. Wilhelmina never tried to kill herself again. She was flaying Roseanne alive more and more severely every day. I got sicker and sicker, and the blood in my urine and feces got worse and worse. In August of 2017, Roseanne Williams let me go, fearing I would die in her house while she was living at the cottage in LaBelle. She ordered me to say nothing to no one. She ordered me to leave the country and not come back.